you with us. And of course, we are sorry that you are here, in the sense that we know your presence here indicates that you are dealing with the death of a loved one or loved ones. While we wish we could be together in person instead of on Zoom, we will try to create a warm and welcoming space tonight as we invite you into our virtual living room. It's such a beautiful song. My name is Diane Halivni. I'm the coordinator of community education at JCFS Chicago, and I will serve as our host. I would like to start by thanking all of our wonderful presenters, Chazan Stephen Stoor and Brian Grossman, as well as my delightful colleagues from JCFS, Lori, Tracy, and Marcia, for preparing their remarks tonight. We extend a special shout out to our other colleagues, Nina Henry, Beth Fishman, and Ann Luban, who are helping behind the scenes and who are available for support during the event. More about that in a moment. We especially want to extend our heartfelt appreciation to Scott Bauer, founder of the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss, for your generous support of this program. The foundation was founded by Lori's friends and family in her honor to give help, healing, and hope to children and families that have suffered a sudden loss or crisis. Here with us this evening is Scott Bauer, who we invite to say a few words. Scott?
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate it. And as Diane said, sorry that you're all here, but I'm glad that we could, especially in this just unfathomable time that we are living in, be able to be here and help everyone and do what we need to do to help the community. So we are glad to be able to do that, and not going to take up any more time. Diane, let's run with it. But thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, Scott. Tonight we will learn more about our grief. And as the writer Anna Quinlan says, grief is discussed among those of us who recognize in one another a kindred chasm deep in the center of who we are. We acknowledge that we are here for ourselves and we are here for one another. Thank you again, Scott and the Lori S. Bauer Foundation, for helping us build this beautiful support community tonight. I will quickly now review some of our guidelines for our time together. If everyone could please stay on mute so we can focus on hearing the presenters. If you wish to share your thoughts or have questions, please use the chat feature. The chat feature is located, for those of you with a computer, on the bottom. And if you hover over it with your mouse, it will open up into a smaller window. And if you're viewing us on a tablet, it's on the top. Marcia Reynes, our JCFS staff member, is monitoring the chat, and she can help you if you have any questions or put you in touch if you need some extra support during the program. And just on a technical note, we are going to be recording our presenters and the program with the PowerPoint, and later in the program, when it's time for a little bit of more personal moment and sharing of your photos, we're going to turn the recording off. So we'll be able to see everyone and kind of have a little more of a private moment. And then we'll be right back on to close our program out together. So I'm checking to see everybody has their settings accordingly set. Okay. And I will invite you now to see what we have planned for this evening. We will open our program with Lori sharing a meditation with us, and she will bring us back to our mindfulness again a little bit later in the program. Brian will share his experience of grieving for his father, Henry, following Henry's passing this past March. Our master clinician, Tracy Kite, will share a review of typical elements of grief and how our grief has been impacted during the pandemic. Cantor Stephen Storr will share his thoughts about Jewish mourning rituals and the role of song in our path to healing, hoping we can find some new ways to mourn because funeral practices in Shiva, we know, have become so different. And we'll do some readings at the end and we'll share some photos. We hope that by the end of our time together, you will feel more connection and more support and feel a little more armed with some guidance that you can use along your grief journey. I now invite to our virtual stage, Miss Lori Garber Amram. Lori is a licensed clinical social worker and recently joined JCFS Chicago after 20 years in private practice. Lori is also a certified Jewish mindfulness meditation instructor and has co-taught at the Arot Center for New Jewish Learning and in other settings. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you so much, Diane, and good evening to everyone. Thank you all for coming together to support one another this evening. Taking a few moments to recall your loved one, close your eyes lightly to envision the person you love. What do you see? Let yourself take in their image in your mind's eye. Breathe, feeling your breath as it enters and flows from your body. Breathe with the memory of your loved one resting in your heart. 3 breaths silently together, tracing the path of the inhale as it fills you and emptying on the exhale. As you breathe, recall the light that your loved one brought into your life. When you are ready, open your eyes, look at your photo, and take in their face. If you've brought a candle, now's the time to light the candle, bringing the light of your loved one's memory into our evening of support.
Thank you very much, Lori, for starting us off. And I hope everyone is starting to feel a little more comfortable in their seats. I'm going to invite Brian now to the stage. Brian is a member of the Chicago Jewish community in the city who was mourning his father, Henry, as I mentioned. Brian and his husband, Malcolm, are the proud parents of 2 daughters. We welcome you, Brian.
Hi, sorry. Thank you everyone for being here, and I want to acknowledge the loss that has brought you here and share a little bit about the loss that I've experienced. My father, Henry Grossman, died on March 11th in New Jersey, and we flew from Chicago to be there for his funeral on March 13th. And the funeral was actually the last in-person funeral to be held at that Jewish funeral home for more than 3 months. And it was a bit shocking, actually, to begin mourning right at the beginning of COVID, because everything was different from the moment that we got there, and everything was different even in terms of graveside. One of the clergy thought they might have been exposed to COVID and couldn't make it to graveside, which wound up being okay, but there was just a lot of change and challenge and uncertainty. And then I had intended to be with my mother to help her mourn and to maybe have Shiva at her house or in her community for 7 days, but we flew back to Chicago as quickly as we could, leaving really the next day after the funeral, because we were afraid they were going to close the airports. We thought we would be stuck sheltering in place out of city, out of state. They didn't actually shut the airports down, not even today. but we were really nervous. And as we're sort of seeing mirrored in a different way, where people have to quarantine for 14 days after being in certain states, right? We came back and we self-quarantined. I really want to express my gratitude to Rabbi Dror Shankin Gould and Cantor Elizabeth Berkey from Anshe Emet Synagogue here in the city, who really helped me to craft a meaningful virtual Shiva, and a virtual Shiva early enough in the pandemic where this was a newer thing. It was actually the first one Anshe Emet had helped to coordinate, and really asking me what would be helpful in terms of people who might not have been able to be present at an in-person Shiva, but who wanted to participate. So while there was a tremendous loss in not being able to have Shiva in person, and some of the touch and some of the ways that Shiva might have traditionally happened, there were other people who were able to participate in memories of my father that happened because of a virtual Shiva. It just so happened that my father had died before Pesach, which is my favorite holiday, and we were able to use his talit bag as the afikomen bag for our family. It was kind of an accident the way it happened, but my father had been buried in his talit, but the talit bag, which had his name on it, my father had a few names because he was an immigrant and had multiple languages in which he had a name, but his talit bag said Tzvi Yehuda, although he spoke Hebrew in such a way that he would say Tzvi Yehida. And let me tell you, it was very difficult to learn Hebrew when I spoke modern Hebrew, and all of my vowels were incorrect, according to my father. One of my favorite memories of my father is actually when we would try to sing Mao Tzor together on Hanukkah. And we're not great singers in my family on a good day, but the cacophony of pronunciations was really intense on that particular song. I also want to express my gratitude for the wonderful support that has been offered as a partnership between Anshe Emet and JCFS, supporting our community in times of loss. It's a monthly bereavement group at Anshe Emet. It meets on the fourth Monday, unless there's something wonky in the Jewish calendar. I think in other synagogues, JCFS also has these partnerships. JCFS has a whole page dedicated to the work they do within the Jewish community here in Chicago around supporting people in times of loss. And I would just like to say that it's been helpful to have the presence of professionals who deal with loss, but also the presence of other people who are navigating the ups and downs, the moments of needing to remind yourself that someone's gone, and really just navigating what it means to accept a loss into your heart amid COVID, and sort of figure out where you have space and time for yourself to mourn and to be sad when there are other things that are seemingly fires that take our attention, and perhaps more so in this moment than in others. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Brian. At this time, we are going to invite Tracy Kite to share her thoughts with us about typical grief reactions and how this pandemic is altering them. Tracy has been a social worker at JCFS Chicago for 26 years and is currently co-facilitating a monthly support group for those grieving a loss to suicide. You will receive more information about our groups at the conclusion of our program, among some other resources, and of course our program evaluation. Welcome, Tracy.
Good evening. hi, it's always strange to do this on Zoom because I know you're out there, but I can't see you, which is an interesting parallel, I think, to what it feels like to be grieving for somebody. So I come to you as a professional, as Diane said, but also as someone who's experienced multiple losses and has walked the walk, I guess I would like to say. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I know, both as a professional and as someone who has walked the walk. The first is actually what's on the slide right now, which is something I learned very early that was super helpful for me, which described grief as the tax we pay for loving someone. And so those times where grief just feels unbearable and like, why on earth do I need to go through this? Sometimes it was helpful to remember that, oh yeah, because I loved so deeply, I hurt so deeply, and yet it will not, like regular taxes, they will not last forever, or the process of doing them will not last forever. The other thing that I always talk to people about who are early in grief is that for me, grieving was the most exhausting thing I have ever done. And I've done a lot of things, like I have twins. So there's something about that experience and how painful it is and how exhausting it is that I think is what leads us to want to know how to do it. Like, what's the right step? And what should I be doing? And what should I be not doing? And I think there's just this wish that if I just knew how to do it right, it wouldn't hurt so much, or it wouldn't hurt so long. And that's not been my experience. My experience is that it hurts and it lasts far longer than you ever want it to, and it doesn't last forever. And to be able to hold those things simultaneously, I think is important. One of the sayings that always holds on for me is actually from a children's book. I had young children. We're going on a bear hunt, which says you can't go under it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. And to me, that is really the definition of grieving. You just have to do it. So the other thing I've been thinking about is how similar COVID-19 is to grieving. And all these parallels, so everything feels like it's being duplicated. So for one thing, and Brian talked about this too, you know, that he went to the funeral and everything has this air of unreality. And when someone dies, there's that air of unreality. Like, it just doesn't seem like you're really there. There's actually that sort of grace of numbness. And I think in COVID, particularly the first few months, felt exactly like that. And so if you were grieving and you were, if you were grieving and you were in COVID, there was sort of this double layer of this doesn't make sense and how is this happening? It's magnified by the fact that people are dying of things that people didn't die of before. We didn't even know what COVID-19 was 6 months ago. More layers of unreality is if you're a caregiver, you often couldn't even be in the hospital. Now I think that they're a little bit leaner on that for in some circumstances, but in general, you couldn't. And so again, just something sort of so out of the ordinary. And even now, getting medical care is just stranger. You can't get in the building until you've gone through a screening. So everything feels sort of out of body. So those are some of the sort of duplications that I find between COVID and between grieving. I also find, just like I talked about how exhausting it was to grieve, I don't know about you, but I find COVID exhausting. Everything is harder. Everything takes more thought and needs to be thought through more. And so it's hard to separate out, is this because of grief? Is this because of COVID? And really, it's just both. And as the slide shows, grief brings what we call grief brain, also known as widow brain and lots of other things. But it's that thing that happens when you walk into a room and you have no idea how you got there, or you have no idea what you did with something, like your keys or your cup of coffee or your shoes or your right shoe, but not your left shoe. It just, everything gets that way. And I find in COVID too, that there's a sense of that because our brains are just working so hard to sort of function. There also is in this time this sort of double dose of reordering your life. So one of the things that grief does is leaves enormous holes in your routine. I've been fortunate enough to hear Brian speak a couple of times about his experience of grieving. And one of the things that he talks about is that he used to talk to his dad every day. Right. And so now there's that hole in your life when you used to call and now you can't. And even if even if he calls his mom, it's still not the same experience. If you were a caregiver, you haven't just lost a phone call, but you've lost everything that ordered your day. And it's enormous. And it's very bewildering and very disorienting. If you're stuck inside because of COVID, it is very bewildering and very disorienting. So again, they're just these layers of what's going on. Grief also brings a lot of second guessing, and people just do it all the time. What am I not doing that I should be doing? What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? And of course, there are usually no shortage of people who to tell you what it is that you should be doing. You should be cleaning out the closet. You shouldn't be cleaning out the closet. You should be, there are a million things that people have opinions about. COVID's kind of the same thing. There are a million people who have opinions about how you should be behaving in this time of the pandemic. So again, everything, it just layers and layers and layers on itself. For me, the answer to all of these things is self-compassion, is understanding that you are doing the best you can and you're doing great. And I don't care if that means that you barely make it out of bed and your accomplishment for the day is brushing your teeth, or you get all the way through work and then you come home and collapse. Like, it doesn't matter where you are or how you're doing great, because the way that you need to grieve is the way that you are grieving. Our bodies and our brains know, they can tell us what it is that we need to be doing. And we need to listen as best we can. Sometimes we need to listen to people around us as well. The last thing that I find is really similar between the two is this decrease in physical connection, particularly if it is your spouse who has passed or somebody that you were living in the same home with. Physical connection is so incredibly important. And when you lose it, there's really nothing else that takes its place completely. And it's also how we connect with people. Right? It's why we hug. It's why we hold hands or grab a shoulder or do any of those things. And yet, the experts tell us in order to keep ourselves safe from COVID, we should not be hugging and we should not be touching and getting close to people because we need this social distancing. And I think that makes it really, really hard. One of the women who I study who talks a lot about self-compassion has some wonderful practices that I think are really helpful, that are physical, that can be something as simple as just putting your hand on your own face or putting your hand on your own shoulder and understanding that this is your way of showing compassion to yourself. So I encourage you to try that out. So what helps, right? I keep talking about, and this makes it harder, and this makes it harder. So what helps? Expressing your grief is really, really important. The things that we leave all bottled up inside of us start to ferment, and then they smell, and then they cause all sorts of problems. So whether you are talking to friends, whether you are participating in the group, the way that Brian mentioned, whether it's just a group of your friends, whether you are writing in a journal. I am somebody who does not especially enjoy journaling, and yet I found journaling to be incredibly important in sort of working through and feeling my grief. For a lot of people, it's art. Journaling is a form of art, but there are lots and lots of other pieces of ways to do art as well. The other thing is to really take care of yourself physically. So that means to get enough sleep if you are able to sleep, because sleep is often one of the things that gets really hard when you're grieving for some people. Some people sleep all the time, and some people have a horrible time sleeping. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. So if you are somebody who's having a lot of trouble sleeping, then at least resting as best you can. Another one is eating healthy, but again, we need to use self-compassion in here. So, if your coping mechanism right now is a small pint of Ben and Jerry's every evening, then maybe making sure that there's some fruits and vegetables during the day somewhere is the thing that might be helpful to you. So we aim for healthy, and we love ourselves for whatever it is that we do. And the last thing is exercise. It's one of those things that we know helps, and that sometimes can be incredibly difficult. So, going outside of your house and walking around the block, that counts as exercise. It doesn't need to be, a 4-mile walk or a run or any of those things. Although, if that's your thing, bless you. So I want to talk a little bit about waves. I always talk about grief in terms of waves. In the early days, those waves were 10 feet high, and they were constant, and they would break over me, and I would sort of feel like I was just laying on the ground and there was nothing left to me. And then lo and behold, I'd be up again. Over time, and so slowly at the beginning that I didn't even notice it, the waves got a little shorter, and the space between them got a little bit longer. And so I could catch my breath more in between them. And as time continues to pass, the time gets bigger and the waves get shorter. But I have to say that they've never stopped coming. Sometimes they come at things that I expect. So I was chatting with somebody earlier before we started about, a birthday coming up. And I actually believe today might be Brian's father's birthday. Those are often the dates that we expect a wave, maybe. And so it doesn't really catch us unaware. We sort of watch it building. I'm, I guess, lucky enough that for me, it builds and builds until the day of, and then it passes. And so that's really nice because I can have that yahrzeit day or that birthday day or whatever it is and not feel that level of pain and discomfort. What's harder sometimes is the unexpected waves. I was telling colleagues the other day, I just bought my children cell phones. Don't get me started. It's a whole story. But it is something that my late husband would have loved doing. He loved phones. He loved being connected to people. He loved all of those things. And so out of the blue, I just had this like half day of a grief wave. And I knew what it was. I was able to recognize it because I've had so many of them. And to say, yeah, it's a grief wave. I need to be gentle with myself. And then do my best to actually do that. So in the end, for me, I think, and for all of us who grieve, we try to find some mix. I used to say balance, but I'm convinced that there's no such thing. So we want to honor the grief and the memories, but we also need to live in the here and the now. We need to keep ourselves physically safe and connected, and we need to maintain some human connection. So I wish you strength on your journey, and hope that you will continue to connect with us as you go through. Good night.
Thank you very much, Tracy. We now welcome to our virtual stage Chazan Stephen Stewart, Congregation Beth Shalom in Northbrook's esteemed cantor for more than 30 years, to expand upon these themes and the way in which Jewish song and ritual and liturgy might help bring us some measures of comfort. Welcome, Chazan.
Thank you. I'd like to make a little transition from the beautiful words we've been hearing to a song. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachole v'hayam, rish rush shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, תפילת האדם, החולה והים, ריש רוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. O Lord, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of mankind, the sand and the sea, the waves of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of mankind. Recently, our community has observed the commemoration for Tisha B'Av, and they've experienced that feeling of exile that the Jewish people felt following the destruction of our holy temple. So too, I think people are feeling exiled today. Exiled from routine, exiled from community, exiled from traditions. And for those grieving a loss of a loved one, Judaism offers a very healthy approach to processing grief through traditional recitation of Kaddish, through a funeral that's replete with clergy meetings and visitation of comfort from others, a burial where one can have the visceral or cathartic experience of placing shovels of earth on the casket of a loved one, thus kind of tucking them into their eternal bed of rest. There's the community shura, the aisle of comfort and condolence as you leave the cemetery. There's Shiva, of course, but during this horrible pandemic, how can one find comfort during this upside down time? Yes, we are still able to rend our clothing to say Kaddish and sit through some, though more isolated experience of a Shiva through Zoom. But how else can we enhance our rituals that are so rich? Maybe that's why they're called rituals. We can daven, and even if you daven alone, that's fine, or you can Zoom or live stream onto a synagogue minyan. But somebody once told me that their parent loved books, and so they surround themselves with 9 other books in the room, and they create their own minyan of items that remind them of their loved ones. It could be a teddy bear, it could be a tree, it could be being in your backyard, but do things to enhance the otherwise lovely tradition. Don't just discard the tradition in and of itself. There's, of course, beautiful poetry like Footprints in the Sand. There are songs from Broadway, You'll Never Walk Alone, things like that. Find music that speaks to you. The earlier song that we started with is quite beautiful. Craig Taubman also has a lovely song, Beyado av kidruchi, the last 2 lines of Adon Olam. Though I lay myself down to sleep, God, I will not fear, for you will be with me. A beautiful way to find comfort and some serenity in these difficult times. There's a song that many of us have learned at camp or other places, Kol haolam kulo geshet tzar meyor. Right, the whole world is a narrow bridge, but we can't fear. We won't fall over. We won't topple over. We won't be afraid because God is with us, and we have a community with us, and we have loved ones with us. The slide that you see in front of you comes from the 23rd Psalm. The melody, this one from Debbie Friedman. Gam ki elech begeit salamavet lo irara. Such a beautiful song. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God will be with me. And the thing I like to point out when I teach this, either at a grave or at a shiva or in a classroom, is that something I learned from Harold Kushner. He wrote a whole book on Psalm 23. And he says, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it mirrors that beautiful bear story that Tracy shared with us. We've got to go through it. We're not going to get lost in that shadow. We're not going to be defeated by that shadow. We are going to somehow get through it. And we never really get over the losses that we have, but we learn to get on with life. And usually with help, like those little hunters in the story. They went together and they found their way out together. There's some other beautiful songs, Hamalach Hagoeloti, the beautiful song about angels watching over us. And when our loved one dies, don't we believe that they have in some way joined the band of angels in heaven above? So music, certainly as a chazan, I'm going to push the music part of it, but music and poetry, and for me, it was journaling, but for other people, it might be art. We have to do whatever we can to wake up with a positive mental attitude every morning. We say Modeh Ani. Modeh Ani is the first prayer that we say to help us wake up with a positive mental attitude. We have options, especially during grief. We can either say, oh God, it's morning, or we can say, good morning, God. There's a reason to be alive. Shehechazarta nishmati, you have returned my soul into me, oh God. And I have been given a new day. The tradition says our soul leaves us at night and records down all of our deeds in the book of life that God judges us on the high holy days. And every morning we wake up and we just say, thank you, God, for a new day. AA and other support groups talk about one day at a time, just one day at a time. And I believe that's the way we get through, like those little bear hunters, we get through one day at a time. And I think that through the rituals and ceremonies of our tradition, we can find a way to bless and remember the memory of the people that did pass. We need to reseed their seeds, or we need to replant the seeds that they were sowing the world with, like a Johnny Appleseed. If they were funny, be funny. If they were helpful, be helpful. You have to be kind to yourself. So you should know if you're in a period of 1 year of mourning for your parent and high holidays come up, you're not obligated to go to Yizkor. And you can talk about that with your clergy. And if you don't happen to have one, you're certainly welcome to call me, and I'm happy to dialogue with anybody at any time. You can plant something, planting a tree, planting a flower, nurturing something else the way you wished you could have nurtured them is something else to do. Some people are holding on to the Kriya ribbon, that little ribbon that they tear, or the tie or the shirt or the blouse. They're wearing that just a little bit longer, just to hold on to that sense of connectivity to their loved one. And Kaddish is a gift to you. I would try to entice you to say Kaddish. It is a specific time every day for just you and your loved one. Yes, you're saying prayers to God. You're thanking God for the majesty of the world and the life in which we live. But it's just that private time that you're saying, these moments are just for you, Mom or Dad, or whatever relative or dear friend you might be saying Kaddish for. So don't discard the tradition just because Judaism or God has maybe felt a little distant from you. I would encourage you to not bottle it up, but to find ways to express it. A lot of people are holding on to the dedication ceremony and making that much more elaborate than it would have otherwise been, because the funeral was so much less so. So think about that. Think about the future. It will give you a goal to reach for and a way to honor your loved one so much. If you have the reason to have to clean out their home or their apartment, there's a beautiful ritual that was originated by a Rabbi Richard Marker. And I have a pamphlet that I've written about it that is based on his. His is the primary work, trust me. And it's all about turning that moment of difficulty of going into your loved one's home and cleaning this out, giving that away, throwing that away. And he turns it into a beautiful ritual ceremony of lighting candles and going through a process of memory and apologizing for things that may have happened in that home that you're upset and maybe feel you didn't have closure during the individual's lifetime. And it really is quite beautiful. The books that you see on the slide in front of you are also just a little handful of the mountain of things that are out there. I'm sure you can get a lot of assistance from JCFS, and the beautiful light and hope that they bring into the world are by offering materials to you and personal connections, which we are all so missing at a time like this. You can light candles, you can study Mishnah, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam. The Judaism says that the candle of God is the soul of each person. And so light a candle in your home. It seems a little Christian, but it's really not. And think about your loved one's essence. It says, Hamakom Yenachem Etchem, that God will bring you comfort. But we have to do a little comfort building ourselves. We have to, maybe it's that pint of ice cream, or maybe it's sleeping in late or just staying in your pajamas or something. God will bring you comfort. Your community will bring you comfort. And you have to self-help or self-care, I think, is something that's really important that people smarter than me will talk to you about. So I will end where I began, and that's Tisha B'Av. In the song, in the prayer Moda Ani, which we begin every morning, it ends with Rabba Emunatecha, which comes from the book of Eicha that we read on Tisha B'Av. And it says, God, you have faith in me. I think that that's something for you to focus on, that God has faith in you. He gives you a new day every day to make a difference. There's a story about somebody going to heaven and saying, God, the world is in such upheaval. Why didn't you do something? And God said, I did something. I sent you. So think about your role in life. Think about the opportunities that you have. There is a tomorrow. There is a future. There is hope, especially with people like the Bauer Foundation and JCFS in your corner. I wish you all well.
Thank you so much, Chazan. It is always a pleasure to learn with you and to sing with you.
Thank you.
It's the final part of our program. Our closing poem is written by Rabbi Naomi Levy. Rabbi Levy's poem will be read by Marcia Reynes, longtime JCFS licensed clinical social worker who runs many of our grief support groups. Welcome, Marcia.
Thank you. A prayer for the comfort of memory. God, what I fear most is forgetting him. I've already lost his presence in my life. I can't bear the thought of losing his presence in my mind, my heart, and my soul. I want to remember it all. His touch, his smell, the look in his eyes. Our conversations, our silences, even our disagreements. I want to remember him as he was without turning him into some kind of saint. I loved him in all his complexities, in all his imperfections. Help me to remember, God, as I make my way through my busy and sometimes lonely days. May thoughts of him lead me back to times of smiles and laughter. Let my tears and pain be eased by the comfort of his memory. I will carry the lessons he taught me always. I will try my best to live up to the example he set for me. Send me strength, God, and comfort, now and always. Amen.
Thank you very much, Marcia. As we end our evening with some final thoughts, the first is that we hope this program has been helpful to you. Later this evening, we will be emailing out more information about upcoming support groups offered by JCFS Chicago, along with a bibliography with some suggested reading, and of course, an evaluation of our program. The evaluation is very important to the work that we do, and we welcome your feedback. So please take a few minutes when you receive the email to complete the evaluation. Feel free to share your sentiments with us, as we really value hearing about your experience during tonight's program and what else you may be looking for in the future. Our deepest thanks goes to the Laurie S. Bauer Foundation for Son and Loss for supporting this evening's program. And Toda Rabah, thank you so much to our presenters, to Chazan Stephen Stewart, to Brian Grossman, and to all of our JCFS colleagues, Lori, Tracy, and Marcia, Nina, Beth, and Ann, who contributed to the program. So in closing, we leave you with the gentle words of Rabbi Joshua Liebman and our thanks for walking this road with us this evening. We wish you much nechama, much comfort in your time of grief among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem.